You're just an overpaid calculator with a superiority complex. That's what Elliot Madsen said to me, straight-faced in front of the entire finance floor, without so much as a blink. The words hung in the air, sharp and stinging like static electricity before a thunderstorm. I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence, holding the quarterly budget variance report in my hands. Behind me, I could feel the eyes of the staff, the interns, analysts, even the senior controller, darting up from their monitors, unsure if they'd just witnessed the start of a joke or the beginning of a war. But Elliot wasn't joking. He leaned back against my office doorframe with that smug, lopsided grin he wore like a trademark. His tailored blazer, unbuttoned, revealed a designer polo and an aggressively expensive watch. He was every bit the archetype of a Silicon Valley import, young, MBA'd, bold, and blissfully uninformed. He had only been at Whitestone Technologies for 4 months. 4 months. And yet here he was, lecturing me, Corinne Halstead, Director of Financial Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, about my inflated sense of importance. I should have said something. I should have corrected him right there. But in that moment, I just stared at him, as if trying to decode whether he truly believed what he'd just said, or if this was just another attempt to rattle me. Because this wasn't the first time Elliot had tried to undermine me. It was just the first time he'd done it in front of an audience. My name is Corinne Halstead. I'm 58 years old, and for the past 19 years I've kept this company out of federal courtrooms, off of Wall Street Journal front pages, and squarely in the good graces of every financial regulator from the SEC to the Minnesota Department of Revenue. You've probably never heard of me. That's by design. People like me aren't supposed to be in the spotlight. We're the ones behind the curtain, stitching seams, patching leaks, triple-checking figures so nobody has to explain themselves to federal agents. When I joined Whitestone in 2006, we were a mid-sized tech consultancy working out of a leased building on the outskirts of Eagan, Minnesota. Back then, the biggest concern we had was making payroll during lean quarters. I was hired during a particularly ugly transition between CFOs. The company had just received a warning from the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board for sloppy reporting practices, and the board brought me in as a temporary fix. That temporary fix turned into a complete overhaul of our accounting systems, compliance workflows, and audit relationships. Within 2 years, we'd passed our first clean external audit in a decade. By year 5, we were expanding into software licensing. And by 2018, we were publicly traded. The systems that Elliot now dismissed as excess process were the very backbone of that transformation. The internal controls, documentation protocols, risk mitigation strategies, all of it had been architected line by line from the ground up. By me. But none of that seemed to matter to Elliot Madsen. He was hired by the board during a wave of executive restructuring. They wanted to modernize operations, streamline costs, and embrace innovation. Translation: bring in someone from the outside with a fresh perspective who didn't respect legacy infrastructure or legacy people. Elliot had come from a VC-funded startup in Seattle that got swallowed in a tech acquisition 2 years ago. His claim to fame? Slashing the finance department from 20 staff to 4 and outsourcing everything to AI platforms and a rotating army of third-party consultants. He believed in efficiency, velocity, disruption. What he didn't believe in was regulatory nuance. And as far as he was concerned, I was just another relic from a bygone corporate era. A stubborn number watcher clinging to job security through procedural red tape. I wish I could say that day was the first time I saw the writing on the wall. But the truth is, the writing had been there for weeks. Elliot just finally said it out loud. Started small. Budget meetings being held without me. Vendor contracts signed without legal or compliance review. Cost center realignments that were too urgent to wait for audit approval. Then came the pilot program to outsource our payroll and AP processing to an overseas vendor with questionable security certifications. I voiced my concerns. He smiled and said, "Noted." The next week, the expense approval authority was cut in half, and mine was reassigned entirely to the new operations optimization team. I didn't complain. I documented. When he asked why we still performed monthly internal audits, I explained it was a safeguard, required under SOX 404 for all publicly traded companies. He said, "Can't we just do one big audit at the end of the year and save the hours?" When I reminded him that failing to maintain continuous internal controls could result in a material weakness finding, his response was, "That sounds like a paperwork problem, not a real problem." That was the moment I knew. He didn't understand the stakes. And worse, he didn't want it. I tried everything a good compliance officer is trained to do. I sent reports. I gave briefings. I issued risk memos. I escalated through the proper channels, first to HR, then to legal, and finally to the audit committee chair. And I'll be honest, at first I still thought I could protect the company despite him. I thought maybe this was just arrogance with a learning curve, that once he realized how tight federal oversight had become in the post-Enron, post-Wirecard, post-everything era, he'd pull back. But I was wrong. Elliot wasn't just ignoring the rules. He was actively hostile to their existence. And that made him dangerous. I began to notice a shift in the team. People stopped coming to me with questions they used to bring without hesitation. Documents that should have crossed my desk were bypassing my office. Decisions were being made, reversed, and reissued without any financial sign-off at all. When I asked my senior accountant about a missing ledger reconciliation that had previously been reviewed monthly, she hesitated. "Elliot said it was a waste of time," she whispered. "He wants us focusing on forward projections, not backward-looking busy work." I looked at her, young, brilliant, and now terrified to be caught between loyalty and survival. And I knew then, this wasn't about me being pushed out quietly. This was about dismantling everything I'd spent 2 decades building. But what Elliot didn't realize, what he still doesn't realize, is that my job wasn't just about spreadsheets or balance sheets or red pens and budget caps. My job was the shield. The firewall between this company and a courtroom. He thought I was just an expensive piece of overhead. What he failed to see was that I was the reason we'd never had a single SEC investigation, never had a compliance breach, never had a class action lawsuit filed over earnings misstatements. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It's earned. Daily. Quietly. With discipline and precision. But men like Elliot don't respect what they don't understand. And the day he called me an overpay calculator, I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a setup. It happened on a Monday morning, one of those cold Minnesota mornings where the air itself feels like glass, fragile, sharp, and ready to break. I walked into my office at 7:42 a.m., as I always did. The lights were already on. That wasn't unusual. My executive assistant, Lorraine, typically arrived early. What was unusual was the envelope sitting dead center on my desk. No post-it note. No handwriting. Just a manila folder sealed with a corporate sticker and labeled, "Finance Ops Realignment Phase 2. I sat down, exhaled slowly, and opened it. Inside was a single-page memo. Bullet points. Sanitized language. Classic executive maneuvering. But I knew exactly what I was reading. A systematic dismantling of my department's authority. Effective immediately. All compliance reporting functions would shift to the Strategy and Innovation Division. Expense authorization would route through operations. Internal audit reviews would be paused pending budget review. My own role would be re-evaluated during Q2 as part of the broader structural assessment. I read it twice. Then a third time. My role was being quietly gutted, piece by piece. No confrontation. No conversation. Just the surgical removal of every lever I used to safeguard the financial integrity of this company. This wasn't just a power play. It was a takedown. I walked down the hallway toward Elliot's office, the memo still in my hand. He was on a call, his voice slightly too loud through the glass walls that executive designers always seem to love. I waited outside until he waved me in without looking up. "Corinne," he said casually, slipping off his AirPods. "You got the memo?" "I did," I said, keeping my tone steady. You're transferring federal compliance responsibilities to a division that doesn't even have an accountant on staff. They'll be fine, he said, shrugging. We're leaning into a more agile structure. Cross-functional. Less siloed. And who's handling the Sarbanes-Oxley attestation? Brendan. He's got a solid grasp of finance. I blinked. Brendan was 27. He had a master's in marketing analytics. He was smart, but the kid had never even seen a PABE audit checklist. He's not certified, I said carefully. That attestation has to be signed off by someone with a CPA or equivalent under Section 302. Don't worry, he'll loop you in if he needs help, Elliot said, reaching for his coffee. But long-term, I just don't think we need this much oversight. It's bloating our operational costs. And frankly, Corinne, the board agrees. There it was. The board agrees. The phrase that makes any executive conversation radioactive. Because once it's invoked, the decision is already made. You're not having a discussion anymore. You're being notified. Over the next week, I watched my authority erode in real time. Contracts were signed without review. Third-party vendors were brought in without due diligence. The internal controls team, 3 of the most competent people I've ever worked with, were told their work was being reassigned to external partners with advanced automation tools. I warned them. I warned everyone. I printed out the SEC's list of recent enforcement actions and highlighted 3 companies who had tried similar streamlining tactics. One of them had been fined $4.3 million for misstatements in quarterly earnings tied directly to the collapse of their internal audit team. Elliot dismissed it as fear-mongering. One afternoon, while reviewing vendor invoices, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A $183,000 contract with a Delaware-based compliance tech firm I'd never heard of. No approval from legal. No vetting from procurement. No risk assessment. When I asked the junior staffer who had processed the payment authorization, she looked nervous. Elliot said to fast-track it, she said, lowering her voice. He said you probably try to block it. I stared at her. He was telling employees to ignore me. Worse, he was conditioning them to see my diligence as obstruction. That's when I realized this wasn't just about pushing me out. It was about erasing the entire internal system I represented. 3 days later, the internal audit team was formally disbanded. Lorraine brought me the official memo at 5:23 p.m. and closed the door behind her. Have you talked to Patricia? She asked. Patricia Arnett, our CFO, my closest ally in the executive suite, had taken a leave of absence a month earlier after being diagnosed with breast cancer. Her absence had left a power vacuum that Elliot had filled with frightening speed. She wouldn't let this happen, Lorraine said quietly. I nodded, unable to respond. She was right. Patricia was a bulldog when it came to compliance, and she trusted me with her life. She'd never allow a kid with a spreadsheet fetish and a Bluetooth headset to rip apart our department. But Patricia was fighting for her life in a hospital across town. And I was fighting a different kind of cancer here, one made of arrogance, ignorance, and unchecked authority. That night, I stayed in the office until after 10 p.m., compiling a detailed risk assessment to submit directly to the audit committee. I documented the bypassing of controls, the lack of qualified oversight, the reassignment of federally regulated duties to unlicensed personnel, the potential material misstatements that could arise in Q2. I wrote it plainly, factually, without dramatics. Then I added a final note. If the current realignment proceeds as described, Whitestone Technologies is at significant risk of triggering a material compliance breach under federal securities law. Further, the absence of qualified internal controls sign-off may constitute willful negligence under Section 906 of SOX. I sent the report at 11:12 p.m. At 7:03 a.m. the next morning, I received a reply. It wasn't from the audit committee. It was from Elliot. Effective immediately, please direct all compliance-related documentation to the Office of Operations. You are no longer authorized to issue department-wide risk assessments without prior review and approval. Translation: shut up and sit down. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't just ignoring the fire alarms. He was cutting the wires. And sooner than he realized, the entire building was going to burn. It happened on a Friday. Course it did. Fridays are the corporate executioner's day of choice, late enough in the week that the shock won't ripple into headlines by Monday, early enough to avoid same-day retaliation. It's a tactic as old as HR itself. I arrived at the office that morning before sunrise, as usual. The sky was still gray, and the building's automatic lights hadn't even flickered on yet. I liked that hour, when the hum of servers was the only sound, and I could think clearly before the noise of the day set in. But that morning felt different. Not because of anything I could see or hear, but because of what I couldn't. Silence. Too much of it. The receptionist wasn't at her desk. The third-floor lights were on early, rare for operations. And Lorraine wasn't in yet, even though she always beat me by 10 minutes. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A calendar update from the system. HR meeting, 8 a.m. conference room A. No subject. No sender. I felt the cold settle in my stomach like a swallowed coin. By 7:56 a.m., I was outside the conference room, gripping the handle of my bag a little too tightly. Inside, Elliot sat at the head of the table, perfectly at ease in a navy blazer with his signature stainless steel water bottle beside him. Next to him, Angela Rowe from HR, her posture stiff, her face unreadable. She gave me a polite nod as I walked in. There was a folder on the table. Another one. Only this time it had my name on it. "Corinne," Elliot said brightly, as if we were about to discuss office plans. "Thanks for joining us." I didn't sit. Angela cleared her throat. "Corinne, as part of Whitestone's ongoing operational restructuring, the executive team has reviewed departmental redundancies and budgetary overlap. Based on this analysis..." "Just say it," I said. Angela blinked. "You're terminating my employment." A beat. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Effective immediately." I turned to Elliot. "You do realize that I'm the only licensed compliance officer authorized to file our quarterly attestations." He smiled like I just confirmed what he already knew. "We'll reassign those functions internally." "To whom?" I asked. "Your innovation lead with the marketing degree?" Elliot's tone darkened just slightly. "We've engaged external resources to support us during the transition. This isn't personal, Corinne. It's about the future." "No," I said, my voice calm. "It's about your ego. And your complete misunderstanding of federal law." Angela slid the folder toward me. "This includes your severance agreement, COBRA continuation information, and a non-disparagement clause we ask all departing executives to sign." I didn't touch it. "Have you notified the audit committee?" I asked. Elliot leaned forward slightly. "That's none of your concern now." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "But it will be soon." Security arrived 6 minutes later. They weren't aggressive, just 2 uniformed men who looked like they hated this part of the job. One of them avoided my eyes as he asked if I had personal belongings to retrieve. I walked with them down the corridor I had walked every day for nearly 2 decades. Past the framed compliance certificates I'd earned the company. Past the awards we'd won for transparency and financial stewardship. Past the faces of junior analysts who now stared at me like I was vanishing in real time. Lorraine was standing by my office door. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. "They said I wasn't allowed to call you this morning," she whispered. "I know," I said softly. "It's okay." She handed me a small box with my framed degrees, 2 notebooks, and the coffee mug I kept for late nights. That was all I took. At 8:43 a.m., I stepped out of the building and into the icy air. I didn't look back. By 9:02 a.m., my phone began buzzing. First it was a system alert, An automated email from the SEC's Edgar system, notifying stakeholders that my Form 302 certification authority had been revoked. Then came a compliance dashboard alert from our external audit platform. Primary SOX officer status changed, immediate action required. By 9:15, I had 2 text messages from former colleagues. Hey, did you leave? My dashboard access is suddenly restricted. Corinne, something's broken in the quarterly reporting system. Did they seriously let you go? And then at 9:27, the first real blow landed. A flagged compliance alert from KeyBank Capital, one of our largest institutional investors. They were requesting an immediate explanation for a missing signature on a mid-quarter 10Q compliance submission. Without my credentials, the company's most recent attestation was now considered incomplete. And incomplete filings trigger regulatory queries, which trigger investigations, which trigger chaos. I sat in my car, hands trembling slightly, not with fear but with the pure, surreal absurdity of it all. He'd actually done it. Elliot Madsen, the golden boy with the charming smile and a slide deck for every occasion, had fired the one person standing between this company and the federal government. 'Cause he believed my role was replaceable. 'Cause he believed compliance was just a matter of signatures on paper. Because he believed experience could be bypassed by efficiency. 10:02 a.m. my phone rang. Caller ID read, Ethan Pollard, senior partner at Halden & Royce Whitestone's external audit firm. Corinne, he said without introduction, I just got off a call with Elliot. He said you're no longer with the company. That's correct. There was a long pause. I'm going to be very direct, Ethan said. This is a disaster. We cannot validate Whitestone's Q1 filings without your sign-off. Our attestation is now in violation. I told them that, I replied almost wearily. They didn't care. Did you document your warnings? Every single one. Good, he said. Because the fallout from this is going to be nuclear. By noon, half the finance department knew what had happened. By 3 p.m., I'd received 3 LinkedIn messages from competitors asking if I was available for consulting work. By 5 p.m., Elliot's decision had been escalated to Whitestone's legal team. And by 6:30, my inbox pinged with a subject line that made my heart jump. Compliance Oversight Opportunity, Confidential Conversation. From Marissa Lane, CFO, Ridgegate Systems. I didn't know it yet, but the next few days would unravel faster than anyone at Whitestone could control. The systems I'd built, quietly, diligently, invisibly, were about to prove exactly how irreplaceable they were. And Elliot? He was about to learn in the most painful way possible that compliance isn't optional. It's law. Started with an email. Or rather, the absence of one. By Monday morning, Whitestone Technologies had missed its internal pre-submission deadline for the quarterly financial report. That report, normally reviewed and locked by the finance team under my supervision, sat incomplete, because no one knew how to finalize it without violating Section 302 of Sarbanes-Oxley. I didn't need access to the internal systems to know that. I knew the process by heart. There were 87 discrete checkpoints in our submission workflow. I had built all of them, and now those checkpoints were lighting up red. 10:43 a.m. I got a call from Megan Tran, one of the few senior analysts who hadn't yet fled the department. Corinne, I know this is probably inappropriate, she said quickly, but things are really bad here. I didn't say anything. I let her speak. They told us to keep pushing through, but the compliance platform won't even let us run simulations without a designated certifying officer. Elliot said it's just a technical delay, but the SEC portal rejected our upload. Hard. It bounced. Of course it bounced. It was designed to. The moment a company's designated compliance officer is removed, all linked accounts are suspended for legal liability reasons. No signature, no submission. Period. That same afternoon, Halden & Royce, the external auditors, issued a formal notification to Whitestone's board of directors. Due to the absence of a federally qualified compliance officer and the unauthorized reassignment of regulatory responsibilities, we are unable to proceed with our Q1 attestation. All documentation workflows, as currently structured, are non-compliant. I wasn't copied on the email, of course, but I received it anyway from Ethan Pollard, who sent it to me directly with the simple subject line. You were right. By Tuesday, the ripple effects reached Wall Street. KeyBank Capital, our second-largest institutional investor, froze all pending capital reinvestments until they received clarification on compliance leadership. Harbigate Holdings, a boutique fund that had promoted Whitestone as a model of financial transparency, pulled their public endorsement. And rumors were beginning to circulate in Minneapolis's tech community that something was seriously wrong. Because the financial statements weren't just late. They were invisible. No previews. No drafts. No press releases. Nothing. I received 6 LinkedIn messages that day. All from CFOs or senior partners at competing firms. All of them essentially saying the same thing. We heard what happened. We're stunned. Would you be open to a conversation? But it was the message from Marissa Lane that I couldn't stop reading. Corinne, I've followed your work for years. Ridgegate is entering a regulatory-intensive phase, and your name came up more than once in our strategic meetings. Would you be willing to talk? This isn't a short-term project, we're looking for a permanent leader. Ridgegate Systems wasn't just another software company. They were ascending, quietly, strategically, and with incredible discipline. Marissa was the kind of CFO who understood compliance not as a burden but as a competitive edge. We'd met once at a private panel years ago. I remember how she spoke about risk management like a chess game, not a cost center. We agreed to meet the next day. Meanwhile, Whitestone was imploding. By Wednesday, 3 more senior finance team members had resigned. The internal IT system flagged 6 non-compliant vendor contracts that had been pushed through under Elliott's direction, 2 of them with overseas payment structures that lacked AML verification. By Thursday, the legal team was involved. According to a former colleague, Elliott had attempted to backdate a compliance acknowledgement using one of the junior analyst's accounts. That's not just unethical. That's criminal fraud. The moment he did that, Whitestone's legal exposure multiplied. The moment it was discovered, the board panicked. Friday morning, I received a call I never expected to take again. Corinne. The voice was dry, cautious, but familiar. Marcella Brighton, vice chair of Whitestone's board of directors. I know this may be awkward, she continued, but we've been made aware of complications since your departure. Complications. That was one way to put it. We need to speak with you. About the attestation systems. About reinstating the controls. And, if you're open to it, about returning in a senior advisory role to help us get ahead of what's coming. I paused. Let her words hang in the air. Marcella, I said evenly, I sent 4 written risk memos. I met with your audit chair twice. I was terminated with no notice, no transitional support, and my removal triggered automatic SEC flags that you're only now acknowledging. I understand that, she said quickly. I wasn't part of the operational decision-making. No, I replied. But you are part of the consequence. That afternoon, I met with Marissa Lane at Ridgegate's downtown headquarters. It was everything Whitestone had lost, precise, calm, focused. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She laid out the structure, the growth goals, the regulatory roadmap. I'm offering you the position of Vice President of Financial Compliance and Strategy, she said. It comes with executive authority, an autonomous team, and a direct line to the board. Base salary plus equity. I want you to build our internal controls before we scale into international markets. I didn't even need to think about it. Yes, I said before she finished the sentence. By Sunday, the Minneapolis Business Journal broke the story. Whitestone Technologies delays earnings report amid internal restructuring. Sources cite executive turnover and possible regulatory gaps. It was a sanitized headline. But behind the scenes, the truth was far messier. And I hadn't even begun to share what I knew. By Monday morning, the gloves were off. Whitestone Technologies filed a Form 8K with the SEC announcing a delay in quarterly reporting due to unforeseen compliance realignment. Foreseen. That word echoed like a bitter joke. 'Cause what happened wasn't unforeseen. It was forewarned, in writing repeatedly with legal references, documented risk analysis, and clear consequences. And they ignored all of it. Inside the company, panic was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was crawling down every hallway. Elliot, once the charismatic disruptor with a playbook full of cost-cutting cliches, had become a liability. His name was now a warning label, something you avoided touching without gloves. By Wednesday, the SEC sent an official inquiry requesting clarification on the timeline of my termination, the reassignment of federally regulated compliance duties, the identity and credentials of any acting compliance officer, internal audit documentation for the prior 2 quarters. That last one was the real torpedo. 'Cause there wasn't any. Not after Elliot disbanded the internal controls team. The board couldn't protect him anymore. 3:12 p.m. on Wednesday, I got the message I'd been waiting for. Elliot Madsen has been terminated, effective immediately. Marcella Brighton, Vice Chair, Whitestone Board. The fall was fast, brutal, and without ceremony. No press release. No LinkedIn post. Just a name erased from the directory and a stack of legal cleanup in his wake. But the damage wasn't done unraveling. 2 external vendor contracts Elliot had fast-tracked were now under investigation by the Office of Foreign Assets Control (OFAC) due to unvetted international payment routes, something I had flagged in red before my termination. That single mistake could cost the company millions in fines and trigger enhanced audits for the next 5 years. Investor relations was in crisis mode. 3 shareholder calls had been canceled in the same week. The stock dropped 12% in 2 days. And through it all, my phone kept buzzing. Physicians had trusted Janet. And now, compliance officers, CFOs, and board chairs across the tech and finance sector were turning to me, looking for guidance, reassurance, a way forward. Ridgegate Systems, my first week was a whirlwind of structure building. Marissa gave me full latitude to design the compliance architecture from scratch, one that could scale across state lines and international borders. I onboarded 3 former Whitestone colleagues, including Lorraine, and established our first internal control simulation within 72 hours. By Thursday, we had a prototype compliance dashboard live. By Friday, we passed an internal readiness audit with 0 flags. The difference was stunning. At Ridgegate, compliance was not a burden. It was a strategic advantage. Team wanted to learn. They respected my knowledge. They didn't ask how to cut corners, they asked how to reinforce the foundation. Felt like coming up for air after months underwater. And then, on Monday of the following week, the final call came. "Corinne, it's Patricia." I paused, surprised. Patricia Arnett, Whitestone's longtime CFO. My ally. My friend. And the one person whose return might have changed the outcome, if it hadn't come too late. "I just got back into the office," she said quietly. Her voice was still recovering, but her mind was sharp as ever. "And I want to tell you that I'm sorry. Deeply. For everything." I said nothing. I didn't need to. "He was reckless," she continued. "I trusted the board to make smart decisions in my absence. Instead, they let a boy with a spreadsheet gut the engine." There was a pause. "We're trying to clean it up, but the auditors say it could take months. And the reputation damage, well, that's already done." "I know," I said simply. "I should have seen it coming," Patricia whispered. "I should have written protections into your contract." "You couldn't predict cancer," I replied. "That's not on you." Another silence. Then, "If there's any way, you'd consider consulting again, we'd pay whatever it takes." I didn't even hesitate. "I appreciate the offer, Patricia. but I've already started building something stronger. That Friday, Ridgegate Systems held its quarterly executive briefing. Marissa stood at the front of the room, outlining the company's growth projections. When she reached the compliance metrics, she nodded in my direction. Because of Dr. Halstead, she said, we're not just prepared for expansion, we're 10 steps ahead. The applause was quiet but genuine. Afterward, one of the analysts approached me. I just wanted to say, she said, slightly nervous, we read about what happened at Whitestone in business school. Our professor called it the perfect case study in what not to do with financial oversight. I smiled. Good, I said. Then at least it wasn't for nothing. There's something deeply satisfying, not vengeful, just settled, about watching an arrogant executive fall on their own sword. Elliot thought he was saving the company money. Instead, he cost it nearly $7 million in regulatory fines, lost contracts, and brand erosion. He thought compliance was just paper. He forgot paper is what holds signatures, and those signatures carry weight. And as for me, I didn't need revenge. I got promoted. 3 weeks after my termination, Whitestone Technologies was no longer the company I had once called home. The finance department had lost nearly half its senior personnel. The stock price had yet to recover. Investor confidence had been shaken, not by market volatility or geopolitical events, but by something far simpler and far more damning: incompetence in a suit. According to the Minneapolis Business Journal, Whitestone had already spent $2.3 million in legal consulting fees alone, trying to patch the regulatory crater Elliot had left behind. The OFAC investigation into unauthorized vendor payments had escalated. Company issued a statement citing unexpected complications in third-party verification workflows, but no one was fooled. Internally, they were facing potential civil penalties and possible criminal exposure for knowingly bypassing AML protocols. The board attempted to clean house. They brought in an interim compliance consultant. They rehired 2 former staffers at nearly double their original salaries. They asked Patricia to come back early from medical leave and restore calm. But the damage was done. Physically, the building still stood. But reputationally, Whitestone had collapsed. I visited the office one last time, not to return but to meet with a friend from legal who'd quietly resigned. Walking through the lobby was like stepping into an echo. The air felt heavier, the light harsher. Familiar faces were gone. The usual buzz had been replaced with silence and hurried footsteps. A receptionist, new and too young to know me, asked if I had an appointment. I don't, I replied with a smile. And I won't need one again. Back at Ridgegate, we had just completed our first full internal control simulation across all divisions, and passed it with 0 red flags. That kind of thing doesn't make headlines. There's no ticker tape parade for not violating federal law. But I celebrated anyway, with my team over strong coffee and quiet pride. 'Cause they understood what Elliot never did. That excellence isn't glamorous. It's consistent, invisible, relentless. That compliance isn't bureaucracy. It's the difference between resilience and ruin. A few days later, I received a small package. No return address. Inside was a short note and signed, "You tried to warn us. We didn't listen. We should have. I hope you're somewhere you're respected now." Also inside, a printed copy of one of my final risk memos. The same one Elliot had dismissed. This time, the margin notes were underlined. Every single warning highlighted. It didn't matter who sent it. It mattered that someone was still reading. As the fiscal year closed, Ridgegate achieved its highest investor satisfaction rating in company history. Marissa, true to her word, gave me full visibility into strategic planning. I now sit on the executive council. I lead quarterly education seminars for the entire organization on risk, compliance, and internal accountability. My work is no longer invisible. It's embedded. I've come to realize something, too. I don't regret my years at Whitestone. I don't regret the late nights or the fights I had to pick to protect the company. I regret nothing except that I stayed quiet longer than I should have. But even that taught me something. 'Cause sometimes the only way to be heard is to be removed. Sometimes the silence that follows your absence is louder than anything you could have said. And sometimes the collapse you tried to prevent becomes the proof of your value. Elliot Madsen never worked in corporate finance again. His name, once a badge of efficiency, became synonymous with hubris. He did a brief stint consulting for a startup on the West Coast, but the offer was pulled after investors learned of his role in Whitestone's compliance failure. His LinkedIn profile hasn't been updated in months. Last I heard, he was taking time to reset. Whitestone survived technically, but the glow was gone. They never fully recovered their client base or investor standing. By the end of the next fiscal year, they were acquired by a mid-sized competitor for less than half their previous valuation. I wasn't mentioned in the press release. And I didn't need to be. Because the people who mattered? They knew. The regulators knew. The board knew. The investors knew. And most importantly, I knew. So when people ask me why I still believe in the rules, why I still follow the long, quiet path of accountability, even when it makes me unpopular, even when it costs me something, I tell them this. Because when everything else collapses, stock prices, reputations, empires, it's the rules that tell us what went wrong. And the people who know how to follow them, they're the ones still standing.